We are now at Easter time, a time in the calendar year where you celebrate the resurrection, of course, of Jesus if you're a Catholic, but also there are some stories along the way. As this video is being recorded, it is currently Holy Thursday, which of course is when Judas betrayed Jesus, but of course that version has taken on a mind of its own, and the name of Judas has taken the mind of its own, especially in terms of football. In football, a Judas is usually known as someone who betrays the club, usually to join a rival or leaving the club at a darkest moment to try and find a better payday. Of course, the most famous example of this is Sol Campbell, widely known across England, especially to Spurs fans, as Judas. But of course, I'm going to take you through a lesser known Judas today. We're going to go through a few of them in Liga Portugal, the biggest Judases of Liga Portugal history. We're going to try and cover one from each big three club, and of course there's going to be one that covers all of it. If you could see me in the thumbnail, try to guess who it is. But without further ado, these are the biggest Judases in Liga Portugal history. And we are starting off with one that's very close to my heart, unfortunately, and one man who I still despise to this day, and that is João Moutinho. So João Moutinho, it must be said, is a fantastic player, one of the best midfielders I think I've ever seen. Very, I would say, criminally underrated in terms of football. When you're looking like best midfielders, he's not really in the conversation, but he was a very good one. I think his career unfortunately just went in a different direction. In my opinion, he chased money a bit more than, the rewards of football can bring. He chased the bag instead of going for legacy, which is fair enough. I'm not in that position, so I wouldn't know. But most people remember him from his time at Porto, but he actually started off as an academy product at Sporting. In fact, João Moutinho came through the youth academy at Sporting and quickly became Sporting captain. He debuted at 17, and by 19, he was already named captain. He was sort of the modern day Ruben Neves in this scenario. Moutinho would make his debut in 2004, but by 2010, Sporting were not competing as they should have been. Benfica and Porto were dominating the league, and Sporting had only been to a final and won a few Taça de Portugals. Back in 2008, João Moutinho was actually close to joining David Moyes at Everton. The deal was estimated between 15 and 18 million euros at 2008, which, if you account for inflation, would be roughly between 22 and 28 million euros. João Moutinho was very keen on the move. He was still a young prospect at that time and had been wanted by some of the biggest clubs in Europe, and he felt making the move to Everton would be a good step in that direction. He'd even famously made some good quotes about the Premier League and how he wanted to go there. However, Sporting actually blocked the transfer. They felt they could have got more money for him, especially with the amount of clubs circling him, and Moutinho wasn't too happy. But at that point, there was no bad blood between the two publicly. After the failed Everton move, Moutinho did make some subtle comments about wanting to move abroad and continue his career elsewhere, but nothing too major that it caused a rift in the club's relationships and João Moutinho. But come 2010, Sporting's direction was still on a downward spiral, and Moutinho felt like he needed to get out to prove his worth and hopefully make a big move to Europe, but Sporting wouldn't let him leave. Moutinho tried to force a move by skipping training and also talking bad about the club in the dressing room. At that point, Jose Eduardo Betancourt, who was the Sporting president at the time, nicknamed João Moutinho Massa Podre, which translates to a bad apple. He was quoted as saying, "Sometimes one bad apple can ruin the whole stock." At this point, Sporting's finances were hit massively and they needed to sell a lot of their players. In the coming years, they would sell Miguel Veloso and also get rid of players like Liedson. So Sporting were looking to sell João Moutinho rather quick, and that is when Pinto da Costa and FC Porto swooped in. But at that point, the relationship between Sporting and João Moutinho had completely broken down, and they just wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. Pinto da Costa swooped in with a relatively low bid of 11 million euros and a player swap in Nuno André Coelho. A decent centre-back, it must be said, but not near the player that João Moutinho was. Interest abroad had cooled off, and Porto was seen as the only offer at the time, and Moutinho wanted to move due to FC Porto's good standing within the league and Europe, and also it would have been a better payday than he was at Sporting. Sporting didn't want to sell to a rival, but they were desperate, and the move was confirmed in 2010. And of course, from that, the rest is history. Under André Villas-Boas and Pinto da Costa, João Moutinho saw instant success with FC Porto. And at Porto, he got that success recognised. He won 3 league titles, 2 Super Cups, 2 Taça de Português, and of course, a Europa League. Porto fans had their new hero. Porto fans absolutely adore João Moutinho, not just because of course he was a big player, but coming from a rival and becoming an instant success. But there is one final blow that Sporting suffered after this. You see, they had a 25% sell-on clause on João Moutinho, making sure that if he did progress well at Porto, they will at least get some money back. But Pinto da Costa, a shady businessman in general, managed to outsmart Sporting. In 2013, Porto sold João Moutinho to Monaco for more than double what they paid for him, 25 million euros. But here is the shady bit. João Moutinho was sold as a package deal with James Rodriguez to Monaco. The official numbers that were reported was James Rodriguez for 45 million euros and João Moutinho for 25 million euros. A lot of Sporting fans and the media thought that they had undervalued João Moutinho but got more money for James Rodriguez to make the difference. This was seen as a way to minimise Sporting's payout and to stop them competing still in the league. Sporting had a 25% sell-on clause, but just of the profits that Porto made. So instead of getting 25% of the actual deal, they only got 25% of 14 million, which only worked out to be 3.5 million euros. Up next is actually not a player, but a manager by the name of Jorge Jesus. We spoke about him a bit before on this channel, but let me give you a background on the mastermind tactician. You see, Jorge Jesus broke onto the scene with Portuguese football with Belenenses and later SC Braga, but he made his name at Benfica. He took over Benfica in 2009 and dominated Portuguese football. He won 3 league titles, 6 other domestic titles, and got to 2 Europa League finals, and also managed to build one of the most successful teams in terms of players at Benfica. He had the likes of Di Maria, David Luiz, Nemanja Matic, Oscar Cardoso and Jonas. He was known for his high pressing style, aggressive tactics and also, of course, animated touchline behaviour. He became a Benfica icon. Benfica fans adored him and it looked like he was going to stay their manager for a while unless one of the bigger teams across Europe came along. But when it came to contract renewal time in 2015, he had a falling out with then president Luis Felipe Vieira, and it was remained to be seen whether the cracks in the relationship could be fixed. Of course, Jorge Jesus had some success with Benfica, and that was still fresh in the Benfica fans and Luis Felipe Vieira's mind. There were rumours of him going abroad to countries like Saudi Arabia, Brazil, but even Italy and Spain. And then, in 2015, June time, out of nowhere, Jorge Jesus became the new manager of Sporting. Not only that, he signed on a free transfer as his contract expired the day before. Not only did he leave on a free, he took many of Benfica's backroom staff and insider info with him. It was a very big move from Bruno de Carvalho at the time, paying Jorge Jesus an eye-watering 6 million euros per year. Jorge Jesus would then put the dagger back into Benfica hearts by saying he was a Sporting fan since birth, and also Jorge Jesus' dad and Jorge Jesus himself used to play for Sporting. And in his first season, he unfortunately couldn't get it done, but finished Sporting on a record 86 points, but still did not win the league, missing out by 2 points. To, of course, rivals Benfica. He did help develop players like Gelson Martins, Bruno Fernandes, William Carvalho, Rui Patricio, and even gave a debut to Rafael Leao while at Sporting. But of course, his Sporting era ended in the 17-18 season with the Alcocer attacks taking the front seat of the Sporting drama. Jorge Jesus terminated his contract and ended up at Al Hilal in Saudi, and then later Flamengo, and it looked like his journey in Portugal was all but over. Of course, until 2021, where he rejoined Benfica. Benfica brought him back with huge hype. He had just won the Copa Libertadores with Flamengo, and Benfica had just made a massive deal selling João Felix to Atletico Madrid for 120 million, so they had a lot of money to spend in the transfer windows. But despite spending over 100 million euros in his first 2 seasons back at Benfica, they failed to win the league, finishing third in 2 consecutive seasons, and he was sacked in late 2021. The opinion of Jorge Jesus is still divided among Sporting and Benfica. Benfica fans still see him as someone who gave them success in his early stages at Benfica, but the return was just a shambles and didn't work out for either manager or club. Others call him a mercenary and a snake, and who just run to wherever the biggest paycheck is. And it's the same feeling at Sporting as well. The big move at first was seen as a coup and a big middle finger to Benfica fans. But after failing to win the title in his first season, Sporting's fans' patience wore thin. And many saw him as an overpaid coach who at the first opportunity left Sporting to go to Saudi Arabia and then backstab Sporting like he did to Benfica all those years ago. Next up is former Man City centre-back Nicolas Otamendi. The World Cup winner was signed from Vélez Sarsfield in Argentina in 2010, going to FC Porto. He was a solid centre-back and part of the unbeaten team, along with João Moutinho, that managed to win the Europa League in 2011 and also win the league that season. He was known for being aggressive in the air and a leader at such a young age. He played alongside some Porto greats, as we mentioned Moutinho before, but Falcao, Hulk, James Rodriguez and Jackson Martinez. Porto fans loved Otamendi. He was a very underrated centre-back and everyone could see the sky was the limit for him. I don't know if many people saw him being a World Cup winner, but still, Otamendi was always a very good centre-back. Porto ended up selling him to Valencia after 4 years in 2014 for only 12 million euros. He did so well there he ended up making a big money move to Manchester City the year after. And he won a lot in England with Man City, winning the Premier League, a few FA Cups, and he became elite defender under Pep Guardiola. However, when Otamendi's age was starting to show at Man City needed a replacement, so they looked at Benfica with Ruben Dias. But who would go the other way? Of course, Nicolas Otamendi. Not only did he come back to Portugal to Benfica, he became Benfica's captain, which stung a lot of FC Porto fans, with a lot of fans calling him a mercenary and saying that he sold his soul to get one last payday. The rivalry did not end there though, with in some Clásicos, Otamendi has been a heated figure, even getting sent off when Porto dominated Benfica 5-0. He did, however, captain Benfica to a 2022-23 league title, and he's also one of the very few that's won titles at Porto and Benfica respectively. So we have done Sporting to Porto, Benfica to Sporting, and Sporting to Benfica, and then Porto to Benfica. So let's do a Benfica to Porto one now in Maxi Pereira. Maxi Pereira is someone who probably isn't that well known outside of Portugal. He became a fan favourite and also a club captain, spending 8 years at the Estádio da Luz. He played over 300 matches for Benfica and helped Benfica win 3 league titles, multiple Taça de Portugals, and also getting to 2 Europa League finals. Maxi Pereira was the original shithouse. He loved a scrap, he loved the dangerous tackles, and he was loved by Benfica fans for his aggression and his leadership. But when it came to contract renewal time in 2015, he held out to try and get a bigger payday, and there was apparently a disagreement on a signing bonus. But of course, ever the opportunist, Pinto da Costa stepped up and swooped in to get Maxi Pereira to join Porto on a free transfer. Benfica fans were furious, calling Maxi Pereira a traitor, and had also received multiple death threats via social media. He never quite reached the level that he was at Benfica at Porto, but he still managed to win a league title in 2017-18. He was a solid option and brought leadership to Porto's defence. He also had a few spicy clashes with ex-Benfica teammates in Clásicos, and after 3 years he would leave Porto and join Peñarol in Uruguay and then join River Plate. He is now retired and is now an assistant manager, although he is out of a job since getting sacked from Vitória Guimarães. Before we move on to the biggest one, I'm going to do one from Porto to Sporting, and that should equal everything done across the big three. Let me talk to you about one of the best strikers, Mário Jardel. See, Mário Jardel first arrived at Porto from Vasco da Gama in Brazil. And at FC Porto, Mário Jardel lit the world alight. In 163 games, he scored 159 goals, totaling 13,000 minutes at FC Porto. In fact, he impressed so much he managed to get a move to Galatasaray for 17 million euros back in 2000. And he was still prolific at Galatasaray. In 43 games, he scored 35 goals. And he even won the UEFA Super Cup in 2000-2001. He would even score 5 goals on his debut in Turkey for Galatasaray. However, injuries and personal issues meant that he was going to leave Galatasaray, it seemed like. But anyway, in the 2000 UEFA Super Cup, as I mentioned before, he scored twice as they beat Real Madrid 2-1 on golden goal, with Jardel scoring 6 goals in the competition, including goals against Deportivo La Coruña, Paris Saint-Germain, Monaco and Rangers. But even after a successful season, Jardel wanted to go to somewhere that was more natural to him and more like Brazil, so he wanted to return to Portugal. And on the last day of the transfer window in 2001-2002, Sporting struck. Sporting offered only 6.2 million and plus the transfer of 3 players. Embo Mpenza, Roberts Verheer and Pavel Horvath, all valued at 3.4 million, as well as 5 million euros in cash. And returning to Portugal was probably the best thing Jardel could have done. He ended up scoring 42 goals in 30 matches in Liga Portugal, as Sporting won the double, the league and the Taça de Portugal. And of course he ended up with the Golden Boot that season. He also won Portuguese Footballer of the Year, which is rare considering he was a Brazilian. He's only one of 2 foreign players to win that award. But despite his prolific goal scoring, Brazil's national team was stacked at the time, of course with R9 being the centrepiece at striker. So Jardel rarely made it to the Brazilian national team. And after that, his decline due to injuries and poor mental health would attribute to his downfall. He would end up joining Bolton before spending time back in Brazil, in Portugal with Beira-Mar, but also in Cyprus and Bulgaria. And finally, the biggest snake, the biggest Judas of them all, has to go to Paulo Futre, who ended up playing for every single one of the big 3. Paulo Futre is the OG Judas. Well, of course not the actual one, but in terms of football, he is the OG Judas. Before Moutinho, Maxi, Otamendi, Mário Jardel, all them guys, there was Paulo Futre. Paulo Futre made his way up the youth ranks at Sporting, being very good at every single level and making his debut at Sporting just age 17, and was seen as a once-in-a-generation player. Making his debut at 17, not only was he the youngest Sporting player to make his debut at the time, apart from when Giovanni Kenda took that record from him most recently, but he's still the youngest Portuguese international to make his debut at 17 years old. In 1984, Futre fell out with then President João Rocha. He felt he was not paid properly and demanded a pay rise, something that Sporting couldn't give him at the time. And that same year, he forced his way out and joined FC Porto for 780k. He was quoted as saying, "I didn't want to leave Sporting, but they forced me out due to how they treated me." It should be noted, Sporting had some players come in from Porto as well. Jaime Pacheco and Antonio Sousa moved in the other direction. It's at Porto where Futre's status as a future legend would begin to cement itself. He would lead Porto to the 1987 European Cup, putting on a man-of-the-match performance in the final against Bayern Munich. He would also win 2 league titles with Porto. Who was the president at the time? Of course, Pinto da Costa. Futre was being considered as a Ballon d'Or winner, future Ballon d'Or winner, at least a contender. And in 1987 he became the most expensive Portuguese sale ever, joining Atletico Madrid for 5.5 million euros. Atletico believed in him so much they gave him the coveted number 10 shirt, and he became a cult hero at Atletico Madrid, and is still hailed as a legend there till this day. He finished second in the 1987 Ballon d'Or, just behind Ruud Gullit. However, his injuries began to show in his left knee, which tormented the rest of his career, and spent 5 seasons at Atletico Madrid. During most of his spell at Atletico, he was also the club captain. And of course, he just couldn't help himself. With his career going down due to injuries, he saw one last opportunity at either a big payday or some relevancy, and went to join Benfica. He would win a Taça de Portugal in his short stay with Benfica, but left the year after. Then joining Marseille after that, then the year after joining Regina in Italy, then AC Milan, then West Ham, back to Atletico Madrid, and ended his career in Japan in 97-98. Futre would play 21 times for Sporting, 81 times for Porto, 163 times for Atletico Madrid, and only 11 times at Benfica. He would make 41 Portugal caps, scoring 6 goals. Even after retirement, Paulo Futre was still a bit of a scumbag. If you've watched the Luis Figo documentary, you'll know. He just loves being a Judas. Even if it's not him, he has to live through someone else, betraying another club. But yes, those are the biggest Judases in Liga Portugal history. What do you think? What was the biggest betrayal? For me, of course, close to home, João Moutinho. For me, Paulo Futre still obviously a big one. To be fair, Sporting have had so many. Jean Mario going to Benfica, Carrillo going to Benfica. You know, there's just so many. Even like Liedson going to Porto, as mentioned earlier. There's quite a lot there. Sporting fans have gone through it, unfortunately. But there's some from all sides, I suppose. But anyway, I've been Sam Fonseca. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a very good Easter. Hope you'll celebrate with your family or friends. Just have a good time. Stay safe. I've been Sam Fonseca. Thank you for watching. See you next time and peace.